On a Tuesday morning in late November of 1981, a newlywed met up with a man she thought was purchasing her wedding dress from her. She was scraping together any cash she could for a down payment on a house. But little did she know, the man had no intention of buying her dress. Her murder has stuck with the Tulsa community for over 4 decades. But with DNA advancements, there is still hope to catch her killer. I'm your host, Megan, and each week on A Simpler Time True Crime, I cover older unsolved cases and challenge the idea that a simpler time means a safer time. This week, I'm bringing to you the unsolved murder of Patricia Denise Palmer. On November 17, 1981, Patricia Denise Palmer, who preferred going by Denise, got a phone call from her mother. Her mother let her know that she had gotten a response to the ad that Denise had set up in the paper. You see, Denise was a newlywed. She had just married her husband Randy back in June, and they were trying to come up with money for a down payment on a house that they were interested in purchasing. One idea she had to raise a little extra cash herself was to sell that wedding dress. There are photos of her in this dress, and honestly, Denise was just so beautiful, and this dress was stunning. I'll have pictures on Instagram. A primary way of advertising something like this back in 1981 was to utilize the classified ads section of the newspaper. And so that's what she did. She posted an ad in the Tulsa World newspaper classified section, and it read, "Ivory wedding dress with veil and petticoat, size 6, $175, and then it provided a phone number. Denise was smart about how she went about this. This was not giving any contact information to herself specifically. The phone number she gave was to her mother's business. That way, if it was somebody who she didn't want calling her, they didn't have her phone number forever. And of course, it went through her mother first. So she had people who were in the loop on this. The ad ran on Saturday, November 14th and Sunday, November 15th. And initially on those 2 days, there weren't any phone calls, nor were there any on Monday the 16th. But on Tuesday morning of the 17th, a man contacted the phone number and spoke to Denise's mother, Pat Carlisle. It was a man, and he said he was interested in going and meeting up and seeing the dress. This caller and Mrs. Carlisle arranged a time for the man to meet Denise at Mrs. Carlisle's home at 4127 South Sandusky Avenue in Tulsa, Oklahoma. So again, I don't know if this was a safety layer for Denise of like, this person's not going to know where I live, or if it's just that it simply was stored at her mother's house. I know Denise was living at an apartment at this time, and that can be some of those types of details where mom just takes care of something like that. I'll store your wedding dress for you, honey. The neighborhood that this was located in, it was a working class neighborhood in Tulsa. The houses were pretty close together. Picture little Cape Cods and ranches. And it would definitely give you the impression of a lot of people being around, witnesses, people who could hear things happening. And that type of setup may have made Denise feel a little bit insulated and safe. So Pat Carlisle phoned her daughter to let her know of the meeting time, and Denise was working her retail job that morning, but she was going to take a short lunch break to meet the prospective buyer. In addition to the details, Pat told her daughter one important thing. She said, "Denise, I've got a weird feeling about this caller. Please just bring someone with you to meet this man." Pat couldn't be at the house herself that day as she was working at her own business that morning. Now, reporting on the next part varies. Pat recalled years later that Denise couldn't find anyone available to go with her to the house that day, so she just decided to meet the man by herself. Other reporting said that people did offer to go with her and she declined. Regardless, Denise did go to meet the potential buyer alone. As I mentioned, I doubt that Denise was really worried because it was the middle of the day on a Tuesday, and it was 1981. There were plenty of people off to work, but also neighbors who were stay-at-home moms or who worked things like overnights and evening jobs, so there were definitely people out and around. This was the house she grew up in, and she was comfortable there. She and her husband had only recently moved in to an apartment about a mile away on South Indianapolis Ave. On the day of this meetup, there were people around, and people actually witnessed the man arriving, and they got a good look at him. Denise had left her workplace a little bit before 11 a.m., and she told her colleagues she would be back within the hour, she wouldn't take long, and so that was that. So when she didn't come back within that hour, they got worried because this wasn't like her. And they knew what she was doing. She was going to meet up about that wedding dress. So they pretty quickly called her emergency contact, her mother, Pat. And Pat she already had that nervous feeling about this. And now Denise was acting totally out of character, not returning to work. So she actually phoned a neighbor and said, "Can you just pop over to my house, make sure Denise is okay, make sure my house is okay, and just kind of do a welfare check." This neighbor agreed and went over to the home. When the neighbor didn't get a response, the neighbor went inside the home. And that's when they made a horrible discovery. In the bathroom was Denise. She was nude, floating in a tub full of water, and she was clearly dead. That neighbor quickly alerted authorities as well as delivered the heartbreaking news to Denise's mother. Her gut had been right. There was something off about that caller. And now her beautiful daughter, with her whole life ahead of her, was gone forever. Police jumped into action right away and began canvassing for witnesses, and they had quite a bit of success. The neighbors, rightfully afraid, wouldn't be identified by the press, but multiple people gave the same account. The man was in his 40s or early 50s, between 5'10" and 6'2", and around 175 to 195 pounds. He was white with brownish gray hair that was more gray than brown. The hair was flat on top and longer on the sides, and he had no facial hair, but he had a distinct, what would first be described as a discoloration on the left side of his face, but later that would be clarified and described as a birthmark. The suspect was well dressed. He was wearing a light-colored shirt, a tweed overcoat, dark slacks, and dark dress shoes. To me, that somewhat signals he either did have a professional level job, or he was coming to purchase this wedding dress and he didn't want to show up as all sloppy. He wanted to come across as put together and really sell himself and sell the part he was playing. The vehicle driven by the suspect was dark blue, a 4-door 1974 Chevy Impala with a license plate from 1981 or 1982. I think that around that time, Oklahoma had shifted their license plate, so they were able to identify when it came. And it had a prefix of either ZC, ZK, or ZX. It may have had a black CB antenna, and the vehicle was very clean, possibly recently repainted, and it had a chrome dealer decal on the left side of the bottom of the trunk lid. To me, that is so much information about a vehicle. In my head, it was driving me crazy. How could you have all of this information and not be able to pinpoint who this person was? But police weren't able to, and I can't fault them because you know that police were likely just pouring through DMV databases, and there's a lot that they've kept close in this case. Possibly it's that maybe this car was stolen, or it was a rental car where somebody had used an alias. You don't know. It's so much detail, but at the same time, they weren't able to conclusively determine who it was based on that. Based on reporting in the Tulsa World newspaper, it appears that at least one neighbor saw the suspect on the front porch before Denise arrived there, like the person was just waiting. Other neighbors saw him on the porch after Denise had arrived home, and they saw the suspect on the front porch holding a wedding dress and talking to Denise. Another neighbor had a face-to-face interaction with this man and saw him up close. They never released a lot of detail on that. It was just kind of a short blurb in an article in the Oklahoman, which I've linked in the show notes. But that is definitely where we get that description of that birthmark, because that person was so up close and actually had verbal contact with the suspect. The timeline and the order of events and how this took place, it's just a bit unclear. We have a relatively short window that we know that she left work just before 11. We know her neighbor found her at around 12:45 p.m. and that another neighbor reported hearing a screaming sound at around 11:30. This neighbor said, quote, "I was working in the kitchen and I heard this screaming. I thought it was some children and I found out later that it wasn't." End quote. Neighbors later recalled seeing the man at around noon on the front porch by himself and that he left after that. A big question, though, is what order did things happen in? He was presumably there before her. Did he follow her into the house when she got the dress? Like, was the dress already in there? But if he did that, the attack didn't happen right then because, according to the Tulsa Police Department's cold case website, neighbors saw Denise and the suspect on the porch between 11:30 and noon with him holding the wedding dress. So the mystery here is, how did he get her into the house? Did he ask her to go get something out of the house and then he followed her in? Did he discreetly brandish some sort of weapon and then force her into the house? But if that's the case, why did he do it at that point? Why not immediately when she first went and got the dress? One thing I thought of is that it was possible that the dress was in her possession in her vehicle, but it just doesn't make a lot of sense because I think her mom called her at work. Some of these things we are left to a bit of speculation, and this truly is, I feel, one of those the devil's in the detail situations because it really sets up for how this took place and how they got into the home together, because really there's no need to go into the home to complete that purchase. The autopsy revealed that once inside the home, the attack that unfolded was violent. Denise was sexually assaulted and strangled, but her official cause of death was actually drowning. It's believed that after the attack, she was forced into the bathtub and strangled while being held underwater. Her body was found nude and floating in the bathtub. Other aspects of the scene have been kept pretty quiet, like were there signs of a struggle in other parts of the house? Where did it seem like the attack first started taking place? Where was the wedding dress left? Any of those types of things, none of that has ever been released to the public. And as we know, things like that are pretty common because if they get a suspect in, they want to be able to guarantee that they have the right person and that the person who would know those details is confessing. What we do know about the scene is that the following was collected at the time. There was a piece of chewing gum found in or around the bathtub. There was blood evidence from the side of the bathtub that was thought to possibly actually be her killer's blood. And there was semen collected during the autopsy. But more on the semen later, because that ends up not being the home run we think it's going to be. A composite sketch of the suspect was released, which I'll have on the Instagram, which you can find at simplertimecrimepod. As her family planned her funeral, they couldn't believe this could happen to their beautiful daughter. Denise's father, Don Seaver, told Tulsa World News, quote, "She was a practical girl who turned down a loan from me to try to raise money on her own," end quote. The loan, of course, that he was talking about was for a house. Denise and her husband, Randy, had only been married since the summer, and they found a house that they really wanted. They needed about $1,250 more for the down payment, and her father recalled that he offered her the money on the spot to cover it so that they would have it and they could just pay him back at their leisure. But he said that Denise and her husband, they really wanted to work for it. It was kind of a pride thing. Randy had been working overtime, and Denise just thought she could sell her wedding dress to give them a little extra boost towards their final goal. and now it had all been taken from all of them. Denise had graduated in 1980 from Pryor High School. Her parents were divorced and her father lived in Pryor, and she would come every weekend to ride her horse at his cattle ranch. Her mother, Pat, was remarried to a man named Van Carlisle, who lived at the South Sandusky home. Denise had a brother, Jimmy, and a stepbrother named Kel. She was loved by her circle of friends, her family, and her coworkers. With their preliminary investigation underway, it would take just a couple of days for police to start making connections to another unsolved murder, one that had some overlap, that was still unsolved, from Tulsa from 1979. In June of 1979, a 17-year-old high school senior named Lisa Henderson answered a call for a model in the classified ad section in Tulsa. She left her house in a flowy white flowery dress with heels, as well as 2 garment bags with outfits for outfit changes. Witnesses reported that she got into a 1976 or 1977 Monte Carlo with missing hubcaps. The driver was described as a very pale white male, roughly in his 40s, with thinning dark hair. After she failed to return home, her parents reported her missing. 10 days after she went missing, her body was found in a ditch in rural Oklahoma, 27 miles away. She had been shot, set on fire, and that seemed to be an attempt to conceal evidence. She was so badly burned, she had to be identified through dental records. Investigators believe Lisa was abducted, sexually assaulted, shot, and then her body burned after she answered what she thought was a modeling job advertisement. Both women had similar appearances. Both cases dealt with classified ads, with Denise placing one and Lisa responding to one. Both were sexually assaulted with attempts to cover up evidence, Denise with water and Lisa with fire. Denise was 19 and Lisa was 17. Both lived in Tulsa, and the suspect in both cases had a similarly described appearance. There was nothing directly connecting the 2 cases, but it was in the back of their mind. In 1979, there were 2 other cases where women were abducted, sexually assaulted, shot in the head, and dumped in a secluded area. 24-year-old son Travis was abducted on June 6, 1979, 5 days after Lisa responded to the modeling gig. She was grabbed from the parking lot after returning from her late-night job at a bakery. Earlier, in March of 1979, 31-year-old Pamela Tollett was abducted from her apartment complex. She would also be found days later, sexually assaulted, shot in the head, and dumped in a rural area. And when I say rural, I should actually clarify that both Son and Pamela, their bodies were found in places that were described as illegal trash dumps, but not the same ones, different places. Detectives were intent on solving this case. The original and ongoing detective, Clay Cullen, he was said to be haunted by it, and he worked behind the scenes on the case constantly. By January of 1982, 2 months after the murder, Clay Cullen said that the detailed description of the suspect had provided a bunch of tips. According to reporting in the Oklahoman, he said, quote, "We've got about 60 names, and that's a good response. We're in the process of running checks on them. We're still running them down," end quote. But despite all these really unique details about the license plate and the birthmark and the hair and his clothes and everything like that, the case slowed down pretty quickly. The fact of the matter is, as we all know, it's so much harder to solve stranger cases. And at this point, there were no additional cases they could locate besides the ones that I already mentioned. And even those had enough differences, they weren't exactly a home run. Because this is 1981, there wasn't the forensic advancements that we have today to test and tie cases together or rule people out. But Denise's case got some coverage in the media here and there. It was featured on the Maury Povich show. And then years later, in the late 1990s, a reenactment was done for a local TV station. It then fell back off the radar in the news media for a while, but all of the locals in Tulsa continued to be haunted by it because it was just unheard of that a woman could place an ad in the paper, agree to meet with someone, and then be killed by that person. In the late 90s, one of the cases that was originally talked about in connection with Denise's, it was solved with forensic advancements. DNA from son Travis and her crime scene was tied to a convicted felon, a man who had killed a convenience store clerk and who was serving a life sentence for that crime. It was actually a pair of people who were arrested, and they did not fit the profile of Denise's killer because they were black men, and of course, everybody who saw the man at Denise's mother's house that day said he was white. The next time Denise's case would come up again would be in 2005, 24 years after her murder. In October of 2005, Paul Eugene Williford was arrested after he brutally assaulted a 75-year-old woman on his Tulsa World newspaper route. So yes, you have that correct. Remember, it was the Tulsa World newspaper that Denise put her classified ad in. And before we get too far ahead of ourselves here, he did not work for this newspaper back then. He only had for the past few years. But he was someone who delivered newspapers. And when he was doing his newspaper route, an attack was interrupted when the victim's granddaughter arrived. So he was attacking this person, this elderly woman, and he got interrupted. Once he was in custody, Williford began confessing to far more than just that one assault. He told investigators that he had actually killed two other elderly women on his route, 75-year-old Geraldine or Jerry Lawhorn, and she had been found dead in her bathtub on September 28th. And then also 73-year-old Donna Jo Stauffer. She had been discovered in similar circumstances just 2 weeks later. Both deaths had originally been written off as natural, but his statements prompted police to exhume Lawhorn, and her autopsy confirmed that she had been strangled and drowned. Also, if this is sounding familiar at all, this sounds so similar to the Salt Lake City, Utah area cases that I covered earlier on this podcast when I covered the unsolved murder of Bertha Hughes and all of the elderly women in her neighborhood. And those deaths were also getting ruled as natural causes, nothing nefarious involved. And then they started putting it together. No, these women are actually all getting murdered. So Williford was ultimately convicted of Mrs. Lawhorn's murder, and he was sentenced to life without parole, and he received an additional life sentence for her assault. And although he confessed to killing Mrs. Stauffer, he later recanted that confession, and a jury acquitted him in her case, leaving her death is officially ruled unsolved, but, investigators have the sense that he did it, and they're still unsure what his true victim count is. Something really creepy about Williford was that he claimed to have planned the attacks. He said he would deliberately neglect to throw a newspaper at his targeted home, and then he would wait for them to call for delivery, and then he'd take the paper to the door himself, and he'd force his way in with the plan to rob and kill them. So these cases took a high level of planning, and it did seem that the wedding dress case with Denise, that had some planning involved as well, but at the same time, she only had that classified ad for a couple of days, and then it was just a couple of days later that she met up with the person, so it's really hard to say. It seemed like this man who was doing his paper route, he was really stalking these women. He was seeing, did they live alone? Would they be easy targets, etc. In 2005, Williford was 64 years old, and that would mean that he would have been 40 years old in 1981. So that's a little bit on the younger side, but still within a reasonable range. I mean, I definitely sometimes get people's ages wrong. The witnesses felt like the suspect was more like late 40s, early 50s, but still. With the bathtub connection, they questioned him about Denise's murder, but despite readily confessing to the other attacks, he vehemently denied any involvement in Denise's murder, and he even offered to take a polygraph. If that happened or what the results of it were, if it did, there was never really any more public follow-up on that. By this point, though, you're probably wondering about DNA testing. The lead detective on this originally and years after, Clay Cullen, his son Eric told News 2 Tulsa that his father was haunted by Denise's case until he died in 2017, and it always bothered him that he couldn't solve it. Eric watched his dad struggle, and he told News 2 that he was trying to carry on in his father's footsteps, keep the case alive, and keep working at it. So in that same interview with News 2, Eric gave some information on the physical evidence, and unfortunately, it sounds like it wasn't properly stored over the years. The semen sample in particular had a mold issue, and it had been discarded completely. So that's disappointing, but, at the time, people knew what they knew, and of course, DNA and evidence and how to store it and best practices, that evolves, and in 1981, it just wasn't what it is now. I am certain that if those cold case detectives back then knew exactly how this was going to work and how this evidence was going to serve later and how to best protect it, they would have done it because they were very committed to solving this case. And this case does get a lot of flack for how it was handled in terms of the physical evidence. And I'm the first one to point out if there's a really terrible reason why you should kind of be throwing accusations at police and if they were just terrible at mishandling it. But in this particular case, I really do think it was possibly just a sign of the times and what people knew. But despite the semen evidence being destroyed, it does sound like there's still that blood evidence and the chewing gum. Do they hold value? I don't know. Again, not much has been released, so we don't know exactly what's being worked on. But we do know it still is being worked on by the cold case unit in Tulsa, and forensics could hold the answers. To me, it is just so crazy that there was so much information on the suspect, but they just couldn't nail him down. This suspect seems calculated. Listeners, perhaps he moved out of this area. Think about it. Were there any killers in the state that you live in that had a birthmark on their cheek or they fit this description? Because perhaps they were caught and it was pre-DNA collection. We've seen stranger things where police believe a person who's in prison that their DNA is on file only to find out it isn't. So if you lived in that area or if you lived anywhere in the country and there's someone who fits that description, specifically that birthmark or how he dressed or anything like that, I think it's worth at least bringing it up. It can't hurt. Because these details, it could bring a family long-awaited answers. Denise's father died in 2015, but her mother is still alive, still waiting for that one piece of information to solve her daughter's case. She told News 2 in Tulsa that she relies on her faith to get her through, and that she is so grateful for the 19 years she had with Denise. I want to end this episode talking a little bit about this case and how it translates into how we act today, but first I'll just say, please contact the Tulsa Police Department Cold Case Unit if you have any tips or any information. I will link that link in the show notes and how to get there. It's a internet link versus a phone number. So as I said, I want to wrap up this episode by offering up some practical tips for the modern day version of what Denise was doing. Sure, classified ads may still be technically a thing, but it's not really what most people use. Mainly people use things like Facebook Marketplace, Craigslist, and other types of buy nothing or neighborhood groups. So let's talk about it. So first and foremost is choosing the safest possible location. Meet, for example, at a police designated safe exchange zone. I don't know if you guys have seen those. There's definitely some in my area, but many police departments now have 24/7 camera monitored parking areas specifically for things like Facebook Marketplace / Craigslist meetups. And all you have to do is search safe exchange zone and your city and they should come up. Sorry, for whatever reason, saying safe exchange zone is a tongue twister for me. Try saying it 3 times fast. I bet it will be for you too. Also, find places that are busy public places. If there isn't an official police zone in your area, first of all, I would call your local police department and request it because they just don't know what they don't know, but it could be just great for your area to have one. But if you can't and there isn't one around, go to someplace like a fast food restaurant lobby, a cafe, large grocery store parking lot, a bank parking lot, because banks have a lot of cameras, remember, and there's a lot of people coming and going, or inside a mall near security. Avoid secluded lots or residential neighborhoods. The next thing is that whenever possible, control the conditions of the meetup. For example, always bring someone with you. Have another person sitting in the car. That definitely just creates a deterrence for someone who might try to be engaging in criminal activity. Schedule your meetup during daylight. Sounds simple, but you know, it's hard. Sometimes with schedules, you might just be available at night, but really just stick to daylight. Keep the interaction outside of your personal space. Do not invite buyers to your home, especially if you're selling more expensive things like electronics, tools, high-value items. Not only do you put yourself at risk, but they get kind of a look at the layout of your house. They could come back and try to rob you or do more. Next is to engage in communication safely before you ever meet up. Now, this is something Denise had really tried to do. She used her mom's workplace phone number. It all went through her mom. So that was something she really tried to do. In modern day, use the platform that you're on, like use Facebook messaging. Don't use your personal phone number. It's really common. I've sold things on Facebook Marketplace. There's scammers, and that's like best case scenario is it's just a scammer and not some sort of killer, but they will use your phone number to scam you. So just don't give out your phone number. Keep your real number private. And keep the communication flowing. Confirm details before you leave to meet up. Say things like, are you still coming? You'll have the exact cash, correct? You're fine meeting at XYZ location at XYZ time, correct? No-shows are common. This prevents unnecessary travel as well as keeps you safe. Now, the next piece is protecting yourself during the actual transaction. So for cash deals, count the money in plain sight. And then this is more from a scam perspective, but don't accept checks, Venmo from strangers, Zelle from strangers, Cash App, I'll send money when I get home. These are some core scam tactics, so just avoid these. Again, this next piece is more avoiding scams, but don't let somebody inspect the item in their car alone. Sometimes people will drive away with the items and not pay you. So that's more just like from a don't get ripped off standpoint, and less about your own personal safety. But back to personal safety, trust your instincts. Cancel if something feels off. Some of the red flags you might encounter are people trying to change locations last minute, insisting that you come alone, wanting to meet somewhere isolated, or offering more money to come to their house. And tell somebody where you are going. If you do have to go somewhere alone, be sure that somebody knows where you're going. You could even do the thing where you have somebody, you're calling somebody and just have them kind of in the background as you are doing this transaction. Share the meetup details and make sure you check in afterward with your designated person. A couple of special tips for higher valued items. Again, meet inside a police station lobby. Yes, this is allowed, and yes, it's common. I actually talked to a couple of police officer friends just to confirm. Only accept cash. Bring a simple bill check pen if the price is $100 or more. Again, that's just to protect you from getting ripped off. And if you're selling some sort of electronic device, wipe it beforehand. Make sure you're signed out of all of accounts. Make sure they can't get into anything that is identifiable to you where they could then, do anything that's kind of aligned with identity theft or things like that. Absolute 100% red flags that are just do not go. If they refuse to meet in public, if they ask for your banking information, if they ask for any sort of verification codes. I know in this modern day, we are just inundated with multi-factor authentication or MFA codes. They should all say, I think one of the requirements of MFA codes is like, we will never, don't share this with anyone. We're only giving this to you to activate. We'll never call you and ask for this, things like that. I would avoid shipping items whenever possible. I know there's just certain platforms you can't avoid, but whenever possible, that is one. And if their profile is brand new with no activity. And just this one too, if they ask a lot of personal questions unrelated to the sale. This has come up in other episodes. This actually came up in my real estate episode and even another workplace episode recently. Sometimes these are the biggest things. You're there for a reason. You're selling something. You're there for your job. And the person you're talking to is dead set on asking things like, do you work alone, or are you going to be here by yourself? Can I stop over to your house to pick up the item? Do you live alone? Will your husband be there? Things like that. Those are red flags, and our brains will sometimes tell us to just ignore them because we're desperate to sell something, or we think like that could never happen, but it could and it will, and you got to be careful. I know this end of the episode format is a little bit different than what I typically do, but the release date of this episode is December 8th, 2025, which means people are doing their holiday shopping. It's not uncommon to do some secondhand goods and thrifting and things like that, and using Facebook Marketplace to purchase items that you plan to gift to people. So this is the time of year that this goes up in risk exponentially. So just be safe out there, listeners. I care about you, and I appreciate you tuning into this episode. But again, going back to the beginning of the episode, if you have any information about Denise's case or any of the other cases I mentioned, because the rest of them, besides the one that I mentioned, was solved, the rest of them are still unsolved. So please contact Tulsa Police Department Cold Cases with any information. This has been another episode of A Simpler Time True Crime. If you appreciate the work I'm doing, please leave a 5-star review. Share this podcast on your social media, share it with friends, talk about it. It really helps. Word of mouth is so helpful. And each week when I get a message that says, I just found your podcast and I'm binging it, it's one of my favorite things. So please share it around. And also, if you want to support the podcast monetarily, you can join my Spreaker Supporters Club. I haven't done a ton unique to it yet. So anybody who has joined and is supporting, thank you so much, because you're really just supporting me doing this work. And I know I haven't offered up a ton of extra things yet, but that is the plan to do so soon. I even have cases ready to go. Part of what I plan to do on there is things like some cases from back then that are solved, but may have taught us some specific things, some specific items that have really carried through or impacted laws or change, as well as just things that are really important in the lessons that they have taught us. And I have considered possibly doing some more modern day cases on there as well. As always, thank you so much for listening, and tune in next Monday for another episode.